Om Namah Shivaya. I am Ravi from Shivananda Ashram. So today we will be commencing a series of talks on each talk summarizing one chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Before we begin, please join me in the opening prayers. Om Gajananam Bhutaganadisevitam Kapita Jambo Phalasara Bhakshitam Umasutam Shoka Vinashakaranam Namami Vigneshwara Pada Pankajam Shadananam Kumkumaraktawaranam Mahamatim Divyamayurvahanam Rudrasya Sunum Sursainanatham Guham Sadaham Sharanam Prapadye Ya Kundendu Tusharahara Dhavala Ya Shubhravastavrita Ya Veena Varadanda Mandita Kara Ya Shveta Padmasana Ya Brahmatyuda Shankara Prabhutibhi Devai Sada Pujita Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Nishesha Jadyapaha Om Namah Shivaya Guruve Satchitananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Shri Shivanandaya Te Namaha Shri Vishnudevanandaya Te Namaha Om Sarvamangalamangallye Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharanye Trambake Gauri Narayani Namostute Narayani Namostute Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So the Bhagavad Gita, as you know, it's an important scriptural text for India. It appears in the text called Mahabharata. It appears somewhere in the middle. And the Gita deals with living a healthy life, both physically and mentally. And when we say healthy life, of course, bodily strength is a must, because if we are healthy, it means that the body has got a good resistance power. And equally important, mental strength is also a must, because we must be free from psychological diseases such as kama, krodha, so desire, anger, greed, delusion, and all these things. And generally, we attribute the cause for all these diseases, for all these mental disturbances, to the external world. The scriptures point out that while the external world could have a part, a part to play over here, they say the problem is not purely external, because weakness of mind is also responsible for psychological problems. We need to adjust to external factors, and we need to ensure that we have sufficient mental strength to be able to resist the impulse of any external problems. And what does strong mental health require? When you are mentally strong, when a person is mentally strong, it means that the number of psychological or mental disturbances which he has will not be very many. The frequency will be less. And even when he gets them, they will be mild in nature. There won't be a huge fluctuation. He won't really, lose his temper so badly that he will throw things or start shouting. So there will be disturbance, but the intensity will not be too much. And thirdly, and importantly also, there is the duration required for him to come back to normalcy. That is to say, the time for which this disturbance lasts, the time will be low, and the duration for coming back to normalcy will also be low. There is a beautiful little Shubhashitam in Sanskrit, says Uttama Shana Kopasya. the person who has the finest, the most refined mind, for him anger lasts shanaha, shanika, for a moment. Madhyame ghatika dvaye. For the person who is not so refined, like most of us, it lasts for ghatika dva, 2 hours. And adhame, for the person who is of an unrefined mind, syadaho ratam, it lasts the whole night. And papishte, for the person who is sinful in mentality, who has never even made an effort to control himself, papishte maranatakaha. Once he is angry, he never forgives. He will take that anger with him to the grave. Therefore, it's important in life for us to be able to enjoy a stable life, a happy life. It's important for us to be able to have external resistance, that is the bodily resistance, to adjust to the external world. And also, we have to build up our mental resistance so that we can be free from the effects of mental diseases. So Shastra defines this freedom from mental diseases, freedom from mental stress as liberation, as moksha. So the jnani, the one who is free from all problems of samsara, he also faces difficulties, but he has trained himself. His internal resistance is so strong that he is not shattered. Therefore, what is the subject of the Bhagavad Gita? Unlike most religious texts, the Gita talks about developing your internal resistance and consequential freedom from psychological disturbances. That is why Gita is very often called the Moksha Shastram, that which gives you moksha. So moksha is freedom, freedom from insecurity. That insecurity which constantly dogs us throughout our life. A proper study of the Bhagavad Gita, an assimilation of the Gita, will free us from that kind of stress and strain. Once free from stress and strain, one lives a humble but happy life. Now coming to the first chapter. The first chapter doesn't contain any teaching as such. But in the first chapter, there's an introduction given. And in this introduction, Arjuna discovers that he has this basic fundamental human problem, which we call problem of samsara. And once you discover that you have a problem, you have made the first step in the spiritual life. You discover that you have this problem, you discover that you are not able to sort it out yourself, and therefore you turn to the scripture and to the teacher. The Gita can be the first chapter of the Gita can be broadly divided into 5 portions. The first portion will be the first 20 verses where Vyasacharya presents the context. What is the context? There are 2 families, Pandavas and Kauravas. They are actually one big family, but they have divided themselves on the basis of the want for the kingdom. So now there are 2 families, Pandavas and Kauravas. They are on the battlefield. Arjuna is clear that he is doing his duty. Like he is on the battlefield, he is looking forward to the battle, and he is very clear that he has tried out all sort of non-violent means, and now, having dealt with everything that he could in a non-violent manner and not having succeeded, now he is clear that he is ready for battle. He has no grief, he is ready, he wants to kill all his enemies. Then, when this starts, Duryodhana, the king of the Kauravas at that point of time, goes to Bhishma and points out that the Pandava army is stronger. Bhishma infuses confidence. He is the grandsire, he has seen many battles in his life, and he is the advisor to the king. So he talks to Duryodhana, gives him confidence that we will win, and this is the state at which the first chapter begins. The battle is about to begin. They are waiting for the signal from both the commanders and then the battle will begin. So this is the context for the Bhagavad Gita. As I said, the first chapter is the introductory chapter. It serves two purposes. One, it presents the basic human problem, which we call samsara. So this human problem was not restricted to Arjuna or is not restricted to India. It's a universal problem. It arises irrespective of nationality, irrespective of religion, and irrespective of caste, education, sex, age, the ashrama, which ashrama you are, whether you're a brahmachari, whether you're a grahastha, whether you're a vanaprastha, whether you're a sannyasi, it doesn't matter. This problem is a basic human problem. And irrespective of any superficial human differences, this is restricted to human beings only. And this does not even belong to a particular time of history. Arjuna faced that problem 5,000 years ago. We are also facing this problem. 10,000 years from today, human beings will continue to face this problem. And this fundamental problem, the scriptures call, as I said, samsara. Samsara is defined as samsriyate iti samsara, that which is in a state of constant movement. Constant moving. You're always wanting to become something which you are not. So that constant movement is there, the effort is there, and that is called samsara. Being, the problem of being they call it, and therefore is also called bhava roga, the problem of being, the disease of being. It's also called samsara roga. So one of the main purposes of this chapter is to present to you the fundamental human problem, which we call as samsara roga. Why? Because the entire Gita Shastram, the entire scripture, is a remedy for samsara. And therefore, it begins by presenting a remedy to this, and a remedy for the samsara is known as liberation or moksha, and that's why Gita is called the Moksha Shastram. So a Moksha Shastram means a scripture which deals with the remedy for this fundamental human problem called samsara. That is the first aspect. Then, the second part of it is to introduce the teacher and the student, the guru and the shishya. Because this dialogue is going to be between the guru and the shishya. It's in the form of a dialogue only. In the entire Gita, Arjuna asks questions, Krishna answers. There are some places where Krishna volunteers information, but again, it's always founded on some previous question which Arjuna had asked. So Lord Krishna is the guru, the teacher, and Arjuna, the spiritual seeker, is the shishya, the student. And they are being introduced here because the entire Gita is in the form of a dialogue. Now let's look at the description of samsara. Samsara Varanam. Vyasacharya presents this whole thing in a particular fashion. And he presents samsara as a combination of three diseases, a syndrome, so to say. What are these three diseases? Ragaha, attachment, shokaha, sorrow, and mohaha, delusion or confusion. So when these three diseases are combined, then you get a combined disease which we call samsara. Look at the first one, raga. It's an important word because throughout the scriptures, throughout Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about raga, and he will repeat this particular word again and again, and therefore we have to understand exactly what it means. Raga means attachment. So emotional dependence or emotional addiction or psychological addiction is called raga. Very often, more often than not, we confuse attachment with love. But here, attachment is presented as a weakness, the trait of a person who is subject to samsara, who has fallen victim to this disease of samsara, and love is presented as a trait, as a characteristic of a wise man, of the strong person who has managed to break free of the hold of samsara. And this is the reason, whenever we study the Bhagavad Gita, we need to be very clear in the usage of the words. We should never use the word love when we mean attachment. And therefore, there are some differences which we should try to understand. So Vedanta is all for love. And unlike what most people say, Vedanta does not make you into a rock, a person who has no feelings. But Vedanta frees you from the hold of attachment, and because you are freed from that attachment, you are in a position to love much better. So what are the differences? Number one, attachment is based on selfishness, which means all the time I am focused on what I get. Let us take, it's a relationship. I am focused on what I am getting out of that relationship. I am always interested in my happiness, and for the sake of my happiness, when I emotionally depend upon some other person, that selfish leaning, that selfish dependence is called raga. What about love? Love is a totally different relationship. It is based on selflessness. So I am interested in the other person and not so much in my own feelings over here. Not that I should ignore my own well-being, but not at the cost of the other person. Therefore, love is based on selflessness, attachment is based on selfishness. First distinction. The second one is that attachment manifests in the form of taking. I hold on to things and situations and people always for taking something. I always want, whereas love is something which is based on giving and sacrifice. Attachment is in the form of always taking, love is in the form of always giving. Number three, attachment is always conditional. As long as I think I am benefiting out of a relationship, I am comfortable holding on to that. The moment I feel that that relationship no longer benefits me in some manner, then I drop the relationship. So it is a conditional, attachment is always conditional on my needs being fulfilled. Whereas love is not based on conditions, it is unconditional. The fourth one, because of this, because of what we have discussed earlier, attachment comes from a mind which is empty, a mind which is not happy by itself, always looking externally for satisfaction. Its happiness, its fulfillment does not come from within itself. It always looks outside for that fulfillment. So it comes from a mind which is completely vacant, completely empty. It always needs an external stimulus. It always needs something to fill it from outside. So it's a weak mind. And that's why it depends upon the external world, other people, other events for satisfaction or fulfillment. Whereas love is not born out of that weakness. Love comes from a mind, from a person who is happy by himself. His relationships are because he is happy. He doesn't look for happiness in the relationship. But because he is happy, he is able to give happiness. And therefore it comes out of a very strong mind, out of strength and fullness. Attachment is born out of weakness. Love is born out of strength. And finally, in attachment, one wants to hold on to the object of one's attachment. And because one wants to hold on, when you are in danger of losing that object of attachment, you will do anything which is necessary for you to retain that. The ethics of your action are irrelevant. All you see is, I want to hold on to that object, or I want to replace that object with an equally fulfilling object. And in the process of holding on or fulfilling, I lose sight of what is right and what is wrong. Ethics, I turn a blind eye to, and therefore in attachment the intellect is clouded by that emotion of attachment, and therefore attachment will lead to a violation of dharma, a violation of ethics. While in love, the person is free of attachment, but he loves, but his intellect is sane, it is clear, and he is capable of thinking very clearly. Therefore it will never lead to a violation of dharma. And therefore love is the sign of freedom, attachment is a sign of bondage. And therefore here this attachment is being presented as the very basic problem, basic disease from which samsara emerges. There, first is the attachment. The second disease is what? Shokaha or sorrow. It's born from attachment. Because I have been emotionally depending upon some external factor, that factor has become like a leaning stick for me. It's a walking stick for me. The moment the stick is gone, I will fall down. So it's a crutch for me. And even if I am holding it, I am always afraid that something is going to happen to that crutch. Unfortunately, I don't realize that whatever object I depend upon for my emotional support, all objects are impermanent in nature. All possessions are impermanent in nature. People come, people go, property comes, property goes. Positions come and positions go. Why? Even the very physical body comes and goes. Therefore, whatever I am attached to, whatever I am leaning upon, that is an impermanent object. And any time in the future, I can lose that. And therefore, Vedanta asks the question, have you thought of this? Have you thought that in future this object may no longer be available to you for emotional support? And that is a potential threat, because your well-being, your happiness is being threatened. And it asks you, what preparation are you doing to face that threat? So we all prepare for old age, right? We work during the time when we are productive, we save for our retirement, but we are preparing for old age by way of saving money, by way of that insurance that I will not have to lean upon anybody financially. All of us do that. But Vedanta says financial dependence is not the only dependence that you have when you grow older. What about the psychological dependence? Are you preparing for a future where the objects of your psychological dependence are no longer available? What have you done to address that problem? So this psychological depression that a person faces when he loses the object of his attachment, whether it be a position or power or money or relationships, there is a certain amount of depression the person will face when the object on which he depends is no longer available. And that depression, that state of mind is called shokaha, sorrow. And Vedanta says, when will you prepare? You can't prepare in old age. You don't dig a well when the fire starts. So don't try to solve the problem after the tragedy strikes. That is not an intelligent approach. So prepare for it now. That is the advice that Vedanta gives us. And the third disease that is presented is moha, which is delusion. So we said there is raga, and on the loss of the object there is shoka, attachment, and the consequent worries and frustrations. Now, what happens when the object is lost? I try to replace. I try to hold on to that object or to replace that object with some other object which I think will give me the same amount of happiness. And my only focus is replacement of that object. Now the point is, I am so strongly attached, I was so strongly attached to the object which I lost, and the sorrow is so severe that my intellect has become clouded already. That strong emotion has stopped my intellect from functioning. So any decision which I take under the influence of strong emotion is usually wrong. And here the only thing that I am looking for is I want to replace that object in the shortest time available. And therefore I will do anything which is required to make that object available to me. So there is no right decision, there is no wrong decision. All decisions will appear as right decisions for you, irrespective of about the ethics part of it. Whatever decision you take which you think is going to get you that object or that person back in your life, that decision will appear to you as the right decision. And all ethical decisions which will look like they won't help you getting that person back, those ethical decisions will appear to be wrong decisions. So there is an inversion of your vision. Everything right appears wrong and everything wrong appears right. So this clouded perception is called delusion and will lead to a way of life which is adharmic. Adharma will be seen as dharma and dharma will be seen as adharma. This confusion, it becomes a vicious cycle. Once my vision gets clouded, my actions will be wrong because I am not able to use my intellect to distinguish between the right and the wrong. Once the actions are wrong, the situation will worsen out. And again I will be under stress and again I will take wrong decisions. So the whole thing has become a chain reaction. The whole life will be a series of raga to shoka to moha, again to raga, again to shoka and again to moha. I get into that vicious cycle. I never get out of dependence. I will be shuffling from one dependence to another dependence. Dependence on one object, I replace with another object, I depend on that object, and therefore I am only moving from dependence to dependence. I do not work for freedom at all. Like a person who gives up smoking and takes up bidi, So one problem is being replaced with another problem. I have not sorted out the problem. I have only changed the disease from one to the other. So this cycle of shuffling diseases leads me from suffering to suffering, which is the fundamental human problem, which is known as samsara. So that is the first part of it. What is the second purpose? I said it is introducing the guru and the shishya and the context to show who is a qualified teacher, who is a qualified student. So here the guru is Lord Krishna himself and the disciple, the student is Arjuna, and the context is what? The context is the Mahabharatam war. So this is about the first aspect, first 20 verses. Then at this point remember that Arjuna is still itching to fight. He has not got into a problem as yet because the object of attachment has not come before him as yet, and therefore he is all set for war. Now he wants to, in the next few verses, verse number 21 to 25, Arjuna wants to evaluate the people he is going to face in battle. So he tells Krishna that take me to the battlefield and show me take me to the front of the enemy, in the middle of the battle, basically between the two armies, take me, and let me see who are the enemies whom I am going to face. So Lord Krishna takes his chariot to in between the two armies. It's interesting to note that Krishna could very easily have taken him before his arch enemy Duryodhana. And the sight of Duryodhana would have inflamed Arjuna's anger, and he would have got into battle immediately. But then the Bhagavad Gita would not have been enunciated. And one of the reasons for Lord Krishna's birth was to make sure that the scripture was given. So he says that in the 4th chapter, that one of the reasons for his birth is to re-establish dharma. So what does he do? He takes the chariot and places it where Dronacharya and Bhishma are standing. Dronacharya is Arjuna's teacher, who has taught him everything that he knows about archery. And Bhishma is his grandfather, grandsire. On seeing these people, both of whom he respects and loves, Arjuna realizes that he is going to have to kill these people. And why is that so? Because Arjuna is a very seasoned warrior. He has got divine weapons. He knows his own strength. He knows that anyone who faces him in battle will ultimately be killed. And he discovers that Dronacharya and Bhishmacharya, two of the people whom he respects the most, one his teacher and one his grandsire, they are going to be aligned in battle against him. So the next 3 verses, they dwell upon the discovery of this attachment. He finds that he is so attached to them that his mind becomes clouded. Attachment depends upon external factors always. What does it mean to say that? It means that I depend upon an external factor to determine whether I am happy or not. For example, let us say that my child doesn't obey me for whatever reasons. He or she is an adult, he or she doesn't like me for whatever reasons, and therefore I am unhappy. So for me, as well as for most people who look at this problem, what is the cause for my unhappiness? The fact that the child doesn't obey me. The problem seems to have a locus outside me. Vedanta gets in and says, no, you have to restate that problem. How do I restate it? The correct statement is that I am depending upon the obedience of my child for my happiness. It is the same problem. Child does not obey you. But one statement is that child does not obey you, therefore I am unhappy. The corrected statement is that I am depending upon the obedience of that child for my happiness. What has happened? The locus of the problem has shifted from the child to myself. Now the locus is internal. Thus, in any problem where I base my happiness on external factors, Vedanta will say re-examine. The dependence on the external factor is the problem. The external factor is not the problem which is causing your unhappiness. What is causing it is the fact that you have depended on that external factor, and that is the cause of the problem. This is called ragaha, psychological dependence. And this is the very first brick for that building called samsara. Remember that physical independence from the world is not possible for any one of us. But we are talking about emotional independence. Vedanta says, Atmaneva Atmani Tushtaha It is a lesson from the Bhagavad Gita, which Krishna himself says, you should be happy in yourself, by yourself. The moment you hand over that happiness to somebody else, you have laid the foundation for your own sorrow. So what is happening here? Arjuna is facing his grandsire and his teachers, and he is faced with this attachment. He forgets that he is a warrior on the battlefield. He forgets that on the battlefield there are no relatives. For a warrior, there are either his soldiers or the enemy soldiers. No other entity should exist for a warrior on the battlefield. But what has happened? For Arjuna, the enemy tag has been overcome, has been now veiled with the tag of my teacher and my grandsire. So he has forgotten that he is a warrior. He has forgotten that on the battlefield there should be nobody else but the enemy. Now, because of this, he is experiencing, a sort of futuristic sorrow. Remember, battle has not begun. Nobody is dead. Dronacharya is very much there. Bhishma is very much there. But Arjuna projects, and that imagined destruction of these two, the imagined killing of these two, brings sorrow. The dependence is real. The attachment, the raga is real. It's in the present. But that present raga is being projected into the future, into the probable deaths of these two. And what is the consequence? Shokaha. Sorrow is the consequence. And that is why this chapter is called Arjuna Vishada Yoga, the chapter dealing with the sorrow of Arjuna. Is it a real sorrow? No, it's a superimposed sorrow, because nobody has died. The war has not even begun. The battle is yet to take place. And yet Arjuna is experiencing all those emotions which he would have experienced had the battle begun and had these people really died. So Arjuna says, hey Krishna, he says, these relatives of mine who are assembled and eager to fight me, looking at them, I am very depressed. My limbs are drooping. I have no strength to stand. My hair is standing up. My mouth has dried up. And Gandiva, Arjuna's bow, that has slipped from his hands. And he says, my skin is burning. I am not even able to stand. My mind is also completely reeling. I don't know what I am doing. And furthermore he says, oh Krishna, I even see bad omens. So here the Gita is presenting the fact that the intense attachment is there. And because of that, even though nothing has really transpired, the battle has not begun, the projected grief is also very intense. And when the mind is intensely affected, what happens? That suffering overflows into the physical body also. So emotional problems, the initial problem is not one thought. An emotional problem is a thought which has been gradually over a period of time built up by several thoughts. One single thought cannot constitute sorrow. One single thought cannot constitute anger. One single thought cannot constitute jealousy. Single thought is not depression. For it to take effect on us, we have to nourish the initial thought. And therefore, any strong emotion, starting from the beginning thought, turns into an emotion only when we have faithfully nourished it, only when we have cooperated with that thought. What is the cooperation? We provide the conditions, the ideal conditions, by always thinking about that particular issue. So the learning from this is, if I am able to take care when the first thought of depression or the first thought of anger, the first thought of jealousy, when it arrives, I should notice, yes, it has come. And I should address not the first thought, I should address the second thought, the nourishing thought. The first thought just happened, right? It was not invited, it just happened to come. Somebody insulted you, so that's an experience. Somebody insulted me, that is the first thought. Now what do I do? Should I dwell on that? How can he insult me? How dare he insult me? Does he not know I am a great man? Should I dwell on that? So whether I repeat that thought, which is what I call nourishing, whether I repeat that thought or not, is up to me. And if I choose not to nourish that thought, the thought cannot conquer me. But if I go on, nourishing that thought, I give it a lot of manure, then that thought becomes stronger and stronger. Like a small ripple turning into a huge wave. The ripple is weak and I can easily overcome the ripple. But once turned into a wave, it's extremely powerful and it becomes very difficult to resist. So Arjuna has allowed the ripple of that thought to become a huge wave in his mind. And that wave is so strong, it has overpowered him. And therefore, those powerful hands of his, which have defeated hundreds of powerful enemies. In fact, the story goes that he even fought Lord Shiva, and he fought so well that Lord Shiva was very happy with him and gave him a very powerful weapon. So that those hands, which had been able to even hold their own against the Lord himself, those hands today are so weakened by these emotions that it's dropped the bow. It can't even hold the bow of his. Gandiva it could not hold. And this is Arjuna who is being presented. Arjuna weakened by emotion, weakened by sorrow. Arjuna's mind has been confused. He is not able to think. So he says, Etan hantum ichhami ganadopi madhusudana api trailokya rajasya hetoho kim nu mahikrate. He says, hey Krishna, supposing, even for the sake of the three worlds, I don't want to kill these people. Even if they want to kill me, I don't want to kill them. What is at stake? Only this kingdom is at stake. Why should I fight? So he said, why should I fight for a small kingdom? I don't want to kill anybody. And not only that, they are all armed, they are itching for battle. Let them kill me, it doesn't matter. This is Arjuna's outlook at this point of time. Now, we may think that Arjuna not wanting to kill somebody is arising out of compassion. Because a lot of people, when they read this, they look at it and say, yes, Arjuna was right because he didn't want to kill. We may think Arjuna has compassion. But what is the basis of that compassion? We say it's a problem not of compassion, but of attachment. Because we said earlier, in attachment, a person's view, understanding or vision of ethics, that is dharma, adharma, it gets clouded. While had it been pure compassion, however much a person is disturbed by the compassion, he will not violate dharma. Right? Compassion can disturb your mind. But where there is a duty to be performed, you should not allow that compassion to influence your judgment. For example, take a judge before whom a mass murderer has come for trial. All evidence shows that he indeed committed the crimes. What does the law state? That person has to be put to death. Now, let us say the criminal cries and begs for mercy. Can the judge afford to show mercy? He may feel compassion. The criminal may say, if I die, my children, they will have a problem, my wife will have a problem, there will be nobody to look after them, all this they can say. But there is the law. The judge's duty is to uphold the law. And therefore, if capital punishment is required, he has to do that. And then if he gives the capital punishment, can you say the judge is compassionless? He did not exhibit compassion? No. Because duty is paramount. He has to do his duty as a judge, and his duty is to uphold the law. What was Arjuna's duty? It was to fight the enemy for that, because it had reached a stage where every other option had been explored. They all failed. Only the war was left. And therefore this is not compassion. What Arjuna feels is not, it's a misplaced compassion at the most, but born out of attachment. So this is called the beginning of delusion. So out of this attachment, out of this mistaken compassion, Arjuna comes to a wrong conclusion. And what is that conclusion? He says this war is not correct. So it's called a dharma yuddha, a rightful war. And he says no. He says, hey Krishna, by killing these criminals, I will incur sin. And that is something like saying that, like a judge saying, by sentencing this murderer to death, he will incur sin. And another confusion. They say that if a Kshatriya runs away from a righteous war, it is a sin. It's called pratyavaya papam, an act of omission. And therefore this delusion that he is having, it overflows into his intellect. And he gives Krishna a long, discourse about the family being important for culture, about the war destroying the males, and therefore all the family being exposed without the males being there. What will the woman do? What will the children do? How will they be brought up? How will religion continue? Because they will have nobody to teach them. All these arguments he gives. And he quotes from the scriptures to support his stand. Now, what has happened? There is ragaha, attachment. Arising out of that attachment, there is born a future sorrow, because nothing has happened for him to be sorrowful as yet, but he has projected that attachment into the future. He has projected the death of these two people, and he has come to sorrow. And then he is now trying to arrive at an explanation or a solution which is good for him. And therefore he gives all these explanations to Lord Krishna. But what is the correct, deduction? Arjuna is suffering from raga, attachment. He is suffering from shoka, sorrow. And he is suffering from delusion, moha. So raga, shoka, moha, all three are there. And like the clinical analysis is, yes, he is suffering from that syndrome which we call samsara. Right? For example, even if a samsari, a sannyasi, let us say, a renunciate, is attached to his ashram, he is definitely a samsari because there is attachment. On the other hand, if the householder has been able to handle the problem of attachment, he is free. He loves his children, he loves his wife, he does everything that is possible for their benefit, but he is free of the attachment. If he has handled the problem of attachment, he is a Jivan Mukta, he is liberated. So the guiding question for knowing whether I am free, whether I am liberated or not, is not whether I am a sannyasi, is not whether I am a grihastha, a householder, is not whether I am a student, is not whether I am married or unmarried. There is only one question that one needs to ask. Am I internally free of the problem of attachment? If I am, then I am a Jivan Mukta. I am liberated. But Arjuna is not. So he goes on to say, you know, Lord Hey Krishna, these are all sons of Dhritarashtra. They are all my cousins. I should not kill these people, for Hey Krishna, after killing them, how can we gain happiness by killing our own people? So here again, we have to look at it from the point of view of the judge. In front of him, a relative of his comes, accused of theft or murder. So I know that in a normal situation in today's world, that judge would recuse himself. He say, okay, I am not going to take this case because, you know, that person is my relative. That's a different matter. It's a matter of professional ethics. But here, it doesn't apply because Arjuna has to fight. And what is he saying? He's saying, if in effect you take his words, he's saying that there are two sets of laws, two dharma shastra. When somebody commits a mistake who is not related to me, there is one set of laws for him. But when somebody who I am attached to commits a mistake, there is another set of law for him. And therefore he says, Swajanam. By killing my people, Katham Sukhinah Syam. How can I enjoy a happy life? So according to him, for the sake of happiness, I can sacrifice ethics. This is the conclusion which is not stated in so many words, but which you can extract from these verses. Arjuna has arrived at the conclusion that if I have to be happy and I have to be unethical, it's perfectly okay to do that. So then he says, Hey Krishna, even if these Kauravas will kill me, these Kauravas are all armed. Okay, they were armed to the teeth with axes and battles and battle axes and arrows and bows and spears. They are all armed to the teeth, while I have thrown away my bow because I am fed up of this war. I am not going to get into this war. I have decided. So I have thrown away this bow of mine and I am sitting on the chariot, and it is okay for them to kill me, because he says, even if those people who are my relatives actually and who want to kill me and I don't want to kill them, so it is okay, let them kill me. So even if these armed Kauravas would kill me, I who am unarmed and unresisting in this battle, that is better for me. He throws away the bow and he sits on the chariot, eyes full of tears. So this is the stage at which we see the ending of the chapter. At this stage, Arjuna has only discovered the fundamental problem of samsara. He is exhibiting all the symptoms: attachment, sorrow and confusion. All the three symptoms he has exhibited. But he has not discovered one very essential thing, and that is that I am not able to address this problem. See, once when somebody discovers a problem, what is the next step? I should figure out how to solve that problem, how to address the problem. So that Arjuna has not yet discovered. And not having discovered it means that he has not discovered that he is not capable of sorting out that problem without external help. So when I face a problem in life, the first thing is I discover that I have a problem. What is the next step? I address the problem. If I can sort it out by myself, well and good. If I find that I am not capable of sorting out that problem, what do? I go to somebody whom I trust or somebody who is more qualified than me and I ask for help. Right? But here, Arjuna has discovered the problem and he is not trying to address it. He is trying to run away from it and saying that, okay, I am not going to fight. The not fighting is not the solution, but he has not yet discovered that. He has not yet discovered that he himself is not capable of sorting out the problem because he has not tried to address it. And that is the crux over here. He has yet not tried to address the problem, and therefore he has not discovered that he is helpless in sorting it out. And therefore, obviously, he has not asked for help. Since he has not asked Krishna for help, Krishna doesn't say anything. Because Vedanta teaching, according to scriptures, can only be given to somebody who asks for it. Arjuna has not yet asked, and therefore Krishna sits silently, waiting for Arjuna to say something. Krishna is silent, Arjuna is silent, and the last verse of this chapter ends up with Sanjaya reporting all this to the king and saying that Krishna is keeping quiet and Arjuna has thrown away his bow and arrow and is sitting in a state of helplessness on the chariot. This is where the first chapter ends. How it progresses, we'll see next week in a summary of the second chapter. Om Tat Sat, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bolo Sadguru Shivanand Maharaj ki Jai. Om Bolo Swami Vishnudevan Maharaj ki Jai. Om Tat Sat. Thank you for your patience and please join me next week, Saturday, same time.